Hey guys, this is Alex the Border Collie here. For those who weren't paying attention, I've been posting pages of my Sonic webcomic, Sonic Reborn, to DeviantArt and other places. I'm about halfway through posting chapter 1 at this point. I'm also wanting to do a comic dub of this series though for YouTube, so I'm gonna need voice actors for that. And I figured since we're about halfway through chapter 1 on DA, now is probably a good time to start getting some voice actors. I will let you know that I'm pretty much just kind of doing this on a chapter by chapter basis, and there's a lot of characters in this story that aren't introduced until later chapters or don't have speaking parts in the first chapter. You can still audition for these characters if you want, but I don't have any scripts to give you. You'll just have to, make a video telling me why you think you should be the voice while doing the voice for the character. Without further ado, let's get to the characters who are actually in chapter 1 and get speaking parts. I'll first point out the bit roles. These are characters that aren't really important. They're not really going to be in any other material. They're just there for brief little moments and get a couple of lines. The first being Honey the Cat, and I'll include a bit of script for her in the description below. I don't really have any specific requests for what her voice should sound like, just, I guess, whatever Honey sounds like. I don't know. I don't really have anything in particular in mind. There's also a couple of lines from some generic gun soldiers. Again, these are just 2 lines, they're very short, and there's not really anything specific that I need from these voices, just gun soldiers, you know. Moving on to characters who are actually important and will be important throughout the whole story, who actually have speaking parts in Chapter 1. We get Stryker, who is a very important character throughout this whole series. Most of his lines in the first chapter are very kind of brief and curt. He'll get bigger speaking parts once we get a little later in, but for chapter 1, he doesn't have a lot of major speaking parts, although he is still very important to this first chapter. I imagine him to sound kind of like an older, deeper, slightly raspy Sonic voice. And when I say slightly, I do mean just slightly. Then we get Amy, of course. Pretty much just what Amy would normally sound like, I suppose, but a bit older, a little bit less high pitch, like a bit older, a bit deeper, and a little smoother. Something that sounds a bit more mature, but still kind of sounds like Amy. Tails. There's a lot of room to sort of think about what you think Tails would sound like as an adult, because, the Tails that we have in canon hasn't even hit puberty yet, so his voice by this point in the story would have be dramatically different because he's now in his early 20s. So pretty much just whatever voice springs to mind, I suppose, based off of his design in this comic and just what you think Tails would sound like as an adult. And then we get Shadow. I pretty much kind of want Shadow to more or less sound like Shadow. Please do not think that that means imitating bad voice acting. I mean, I want Shadow to still have a decent amount of emotion in his voice. I want his lines to be delivered relatively comfortably, but to still sort of imitate that sort of, I guess you could say, shadowy voice that he's kind of always had. Uh, just don't, overplay it too much, and maybe make it a little bit deeper. So those are all the characters that actually have scripts. Like I said, I will put little bits of dialogue from them in the description below, so you can read those bits of script and practice with those. As far as characters that are going to be important to the story but don't have any scripts yet for them, but you can still audition if you like, we get Knuckles, who, Knuckles. He needs to have a really strong, deep, manly voice, I would really prefer girls not to audition for Knuckles. Just don't bother. I don't mind girls voicing a male character, but with this guy in particular, he needs to have a really masculine voice, ideally. Alternatively, though, you girls may not be able to audition for Knuckles, but we also have Rose, who Rose would be pretty easy for just about anyone to do, I imagine. She's a little girl, about 8 or 9 years old. She also tends to have a little bit of a monotone to her, or a little bit of a kind of quiet, depressed sort of demeanor to her. So that's something to consider with her voice. Then we get Rouge, who, I like to go Personally, with Rouge, I like to go the sort of deep, sexy, older woman route, especially for this story with her being in her late 20s. Then we get Crescent, who you guys are probably familiar with. If you're not, that's okay. Crescent just needs a voice that's cute and bubbly and matches that cute, bubbly personality that people have learned to associate her with. And remember, Crescent doesn't always use proper grammar. She has a tendency to sort of speak in somewhat broken sentences due to a mental disability. I want her to be, sweet and endearing. Then we get Blaze, who still gonna pretty much just sound like Blaze, but I want to add a little bit of an edge to her voice, make her sound a little bit harsh or bitter. Then Silver, who Silver's voice I imagine to be somewhat androgynous, like not super masculine but not really feminine either. But he kind of has this hint of guilt to his character, so there's a lot of sort of like when he's being kind and gentle, there tends to be a sort of bittersweetness to that. Then we get Nira, who's another character that a number of you are probably familiar with at this point. Nira should have something that's a bit more distant and mysterious. She can have a little bit of a sexiness to her voice, but she sounds, when she speaks, almost like she's not even human. Like, she sounds something sort of beyond just the normal person. She has a sort of, like, alien quality to her when she speaks, a sort of lack of empathy in her voice. Then we get Sylvia, who's this sort of little combination of a girly girl and a tomboy at the same time. She's kind of got also kind of a cute girl voice. Not quite as bubbly as Crescent, but still certainly one of the more girly voices. And then of course, I'm gonna need a voice for Robotnik. Pretty much just if you can do a decent impersonation of like Mike Pollock, then we're pretty much good here. Although I wouldn't mind the thought of a slight hint of a Russian accent. And that might sound silly, but if I can hear somebody who can do that and make it sound good, then that would be really pretty awesome. So yeah, that's all the characters for now. Like all the major characters and all the speaking parts for the first chapter. If you're auditioning through YouTube, just post your video. Leave a link to the video in the comments section for me so I can take a look. You can also email me audio files at alexdaily@gmail.com and I can look through those as well. So yeah, that's about all I've got to say on this. Yeah, I look forward to hearing your entries and don't take yourself too seriously.